Support for this podcast comes from Boston University's Questrom School of Business, presenting the Is Business Broken podcast, featuring conversations about the role of business, stakeholder relations, and government at bu.edu/Questrom or wherever podcasts are available. Support for this podcast comes from Engineered Success, a podcast from MathWorks, partnering with more than 500 accelerators to provide free licensing to startups. Stick around until the end of this episode to hear how one of those accelerators is advancing climate-centered technology.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. I know a lot of you are thinking about the election, and you probably want to hear more about it, but we at The Common are holding off on that for a more in-depth conversation next week, so just hold tight. But in the meantime, we want to share our interview with Chris Osgood, Boston's director of the Office of Climate Resilience. Mayor Wu created the office and appointed Osgood as its head in August. In the past, he served as chief of streets and chief of staff for the city as well. Now, Osgood came through to the studio in September, and we talked about some of the things we can expect from the new office. Chris, welcome to The Common.
Daryl, it's wonderful to be here.
Wonderful to have you. So, Chris, I want to get really super basic just to set the table for this conversation. Outline to us what exactly climate resilience is, and then give us your picture for what that looks like in Boston.
Climate change will impact the city of Boston in a variety of different ways.
We're a coastal city, right?
We're a coastal city. And to that point, we are looking at an increase in the frequency of coastal flooding. We are looking at an increase in extreme temperatures and extreme rainfall events. We can get more into the specifics around that. Adapting the city of Boston, both its infrastructure and the support it provides to its residents, is absolutely critical so that we can continue to be a wonderful place that all residents can call home, both in this generation and going forward.
And what are you hearing from residents? What are their needs?
So community organizations, particularly organizations that live along Boston's coast, are really mindful of the risk of coastal flooding. And this is not something which is abstract or necessarily far off. In fact, there are places in the city of Boston, even on a sunny day, that on some days throughout the year we'll actually see coastal flooding. This happens in particular on days where there are particularly high tides, often called king tides. That'll happen a couple of times over the course of this fall. Places like Long Wharf downtown, places along the Fort Point Channel, places in East Boston, all will likely be impacted by a degree of coastal flooding. And residents want to make sure that there are plans in place around emergency response in the short term. There's work being done, and the work is being done, to close those flood paths in the medium term, and that across the entirety of Boston's 47 miles of coastline, that we've got a strategy to be able to address the long-term risk that coastal flooding presents to the city. And that work is actually also underway in a collaboration with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Yeah, what's the idea for those plans?
So the work that we are looking at, particularly in that sort of second and third category, which is about the physical transformation of Boston's coastline. In the near term, we are looking at between 15 and 20 locations along Boston's coast where, if left unaddressed over the course of this decade or next, there's a risk of some significant inland flooding. Those are the places where we are investing our time and our dollars most significantly right now. There's a list of those on the city's website for folks who are interested in learning more about them. These are places where we're not only looking to address the risk that coastal flooding presents by raising a park or by raising the harbor walk or by raising a road, but also to be able to make improvements to that park, to that harbor walk, to that road as we do that. In the long term, there's going to be a more significant work which will likely be done in collaboration with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The Army Corps is the principal partner for work across the country around a number of coastal flooding related issues. And we have a collaboration with them, which residents can learn more about and plug into, which will likely lead to a series of capital projects in the next decade that really support our city, again, for generations to come.
Why was it necessary to, not that I don't want you to have a job, Chris, but like, why was it necessary to establish this office? I mean, is it something that the city just couldn't handle as they were?
Great question. So the really good news is that for years, the city of Boston, across a wide variety of departments, have been doing a lot of important, impactful work, both developing plans and doing early demonstration projects and implementing impactful policies and programs to address the risks of climate change. There is an interest, though, as we look at these risks, to be able to provide a level of support across all these departments and to accelerate the pace of implementation, just given the urgency of the issue in front of us. Mm-hmm. And so the office is very much focused on internally making sure that we are coordinating, supporting, and aligning the work of departments across the city. Second, to a question you asked earlier, also making sure that we are communicating publicly. What are the plans the city has? What's the progress that we are making? How do we create a front door for any person who's looking to partner with the city on this work? And then third, to create an office that is leading a set of key projects that span across a variety of departments. Some of that will be specifically within areas like coastal flooding or heat. Others are around sort of building capacity broadly within the city so that we can make sure we're delivering the projects that residents want. Yeah.
Boston is also a heat island.
Correct.
What are you thinking about in terms of that?
So last year, just as context, the Commonwealth tied for the hottest year on record for the state. And already in the United States, the number one weather-related cause of death is extreme heat. So extreme heat is an incredibly important issue for us to focus on. In 2022, with a lot of credit to a staff member within the Office of Climate Resilience, we published a set of heat resilience strategies. And they really focus on two separate things. One is to make sure that during extreme heat events, which certainly have happened a number of times, including 3 heat emergencies that were declared by the mayor over the course of this last summer, that we are providing additional cooling resources to residents. So if you go, for example, onto the city's website to boston.gov/heat, you can see a map of every splash pad in the city of Boston, cooling center, pool, places where residents can be able to find shade, water, a place to rest during these incredibly hot events. We expanded our toolkit over the course of this summer with a lot of credit to the city's Office of Emergency Management and its Public Health Commission, adding things like misting towers and shade structures and misting tents. And we're going to continue a whole set of work heading into future summers that are really geared around relief. But there's a second strategy, too, to your question, which is less around the response during a heat emergency and more about efforts we're taking to make sure that our city is cooler as temperatures rise. This includes some key work being led by our Parks Department around the expansion of our urban forestry. As you may know, the city of Boston has a canopy cover of roughly 27%, but that is not equally spread across all of our neighborhoods. In fact, there are some neighborhoods in our city that have far more asphalt, far less canopy cover. Many of those neighborhoods are places that have been historically disinvested in. And there's a close correlation between those neighborhoods that experience the highest levels of heat and either chronic disinvestment or past racial discriminatory practices like redlining. And so through the city's urban forestry plan, we are very focused on making sure that we are increasing our investment in expanding the city of Boston's canopy cover, in bringing new trees to neighborhoods that have had fewer shade trees in the past, and not just planting them, but actually expanding the amount of maintenance and care that we're providing for them, so they're not just going into the ground, but actually thriving for the neighborhood and neighbors to come.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you could put some of that flood water to use.
I mean, this is the thing about trees. They provide sort of a multitude of benefits. They make streets beautiful. They provide shade on hot days, and they also help absorb a fair amount of stormwater that can impact cities.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about community collaboration.
Yep.
Last year, we did a piece for Climate Week, right? And we went to Chinatown because they have a project where they are building microgrids, kind of like a smaller insulated electric system, as I recall, right? So that should the larger power grid shut down for whatever reason, say it's a heat wave, everybody's got their AC on, blows out the power grid, they have a backup so that they can keep cool, right? And this is, it's one of those projects you look at and you go, are you thinking about collaborating and supporting those type of projects?
Yes is the answer. And this is really part of the work which is happening across the administration, with great credit to the mayor and our chief climate officer, Brian Sweat, and the head of the city's Green New Deal office and our environment commissioner, Oliver Sellers Garcia. There is no way we're going to do the scale of work we need at the pace we need to do it without engaging partners. And so a lot of the work that we are taking on is not necessarily work the city is going to be doing directly, but supported through a series of grants or policies and programs that allow for neighborhood organizations to be able to advance key projects around resilience. Some of that, to the point that you just gave, is around decarbonization or energy transition. Some of that is going to be about empowering our residents to help plant trees on private property, or to think about how they can take steps on their property to be prepared for any of the impacts of coastal flooding or severe stormwater events.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back.
Support for this podcast comes from Engineered Success, a podcast from MathWorks, a proud partner of startups, incubators, and accelerators.
I mean, we're a 40-year-old company, but we once were a startup ourselves. We see the startups drive a lot of innovation in several key industries that we play a role.
Stick around until the end of this episode to learn about one of these partners, climate tech incubator Greentown Labs, and how their member startups are solving today's climate challenges.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarty, host of On Point. At a time when the world is more complex than ever, On Point's daily deep dive conversation takes the time to make the world more intelligible. From the state of democracy to how artificial intelligence is transforming the way we live and work to the wonders of the natural world. One topic each day, one rich and nuanced exploration. That's On Point from WBUR. Be sure to follow us right here in your podcast feed.
And we're back with Chris Osgood. I got to ask about equity, right? Mm-hmm. You mentioned that 27% of the city is covered by trees, and they're not all spread out. And you mentioned redlining and things like that. Tell me how you are thinking about being climate resilient for the entire city, everybody.
It's a great question. And it is.
It's what I do, Chris.
Totally. It is top of mind in our plans and in our investments. And I would say, obviously, we discussed the example of trees, and there's some similar efforts around coastal flooding. I would say it is both about where we invest and what we build, but also how we think about who builds and how we make sure that we are creating real workforce development opportunities for Boston residents into the careers that are going to become increasingly of need as we are expanding our investment around resilience. It was a couple of years ago that a terrific program was launched here in the city in collaboration with the city itself called PowerCore. We have been able to expand our investment in this workforce development program that focuses on providing building pathways into green jobs careers so that we are having the workforce we need to be able to care for the trees that we plant, to be able to maintain the green infrastructure that we are putting in place in our city streets, and doing the needed construction work and overseeing the construction work as we transform our entire coastline.
You know, it's funny, you mentioned PowerCore. We were doing a piece out in Franklin Park, and we actually ran into a crew doing some work out there, so shout out to them. On that note of equity, I'm also thinking about people with disabilities and the relationship between climate change, climate resiliency, and mobility. Talk to us about what you're thinking in regards to a climate plan for that population.
So with a lot of credit to our streets cabinet, they are very focused on making our city much more accessible and much easier for everybody to be able to navigate. That includes a significant investment in building out and improving our sidewalks, expanding the number of pedestrian ramps, being able to make alterations to our streets that can calm speeds, reduce or eliminate crashes, and save lives. There is an opportunity as we think about every single one of those changes to build resilient infrastructure, green infrastructure into that redesigned street. And 2 years ago or 3 years ago, the city created its first Office of Green Infrastructure, embedded within the Streets Cabinet. This is a fantastic team, and they are focused on changing the standards so that as we build or rebuild streets across the city of Boston, we are building them in a way that are accessible and resilient from the start. And you can see some of that great work already some early examples of it in places like Audubon Circle in the Fenway, it's Central Square in East Boston, and even the rebuilt north section of City Hall Plaza that incorporates a significant amount of green infrastructure to be able to provide a much more enjoyable place for people to congregate and to play.
Mm-hmm. For everybody.
For everybody.
So I imagine, every week or something, all the heads of the different departments sit at a table together and they say, this is what we want to do. And everybody puts their 2 cents in to make sure everybody's represented.
So there are a regular set of meetings which do occur at a number of different levels. And again, I think the great strength of where we are in the city of Boston is that there have been years of community planning that has been formed by great research so that there is a clear roadmap of the work that we need to be doing already. And now, in many ways, the effort is how do we accelerate the pace of implementation?
Who from the community representing disability people, who's in your ear right now?
Our Mayor's Office of Persons with Disabilities, which is headed by Kristen McCosh, is a phenomenal partner in our work.
Mm-hmm. Who else from the community?
So she has a broader set of stakeholders that she works with. And I think that there's an opportunity for us as we go further in our work around coastal resilience and further in our work around green infrastructure on city streets to think about how we accelerate and expand that work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Chris, I know we talked a bit about collaboration with communities and stuff. And, climate change is an issue that's not exclusive to the Boston community. It affects all communities, right? So how are you working with the surrounding communities of the Boston area?
So I think there's a number of ways in which that is happening. To give you a couple of very specific examples, we have a project right now at the border of East Boston and Revere, about a quarter-mile stretch of Bennington Street. That is a stretch that has flooded recently. That road has recently, during a major storm, was recently shut down. And if we do not do work in that stretch, key transportation corridors like the Blue Line or Bennington Street itself will become significantly impacted. We were fortunate to receive a grant from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for a collaborative project between the city of Boston and the city of Revere. And that project has advanced. We've had a whole series of public conversations and public meetings about it. We were fortunate to have received a second round of funding from the Commonwealth. And over the course of the next year, we'll be getting that project ready for construction. It's the sort of example of collaboration between two municipalities that is necessary because flood paths do not care about municipal boundaries. We need to do the work where the work needs to get done, and sometimes that means in collaboration with our partner cities and towns, and with great support from the state and great collaboration across the 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. I think we're going to see that work increasingly happen. All
right. So a little while ago, we talked to Corrine Reynolds, the director of nightlife economy, the nightlife czar.
Exactly.
One of the challenges to Boston nightlife, many of the challenges of Boston nightlife are like structural, right? The T shuts down after a certain time. Liquor licenses are scarce within the city of Boston, et cetera, those type of things. What are the structural issues for you? What are the big challenges that your office is facing?
Great question.
I know it's still early, but
we are really focused on, again, the sort of moving faster to implement the work that we need to do. And there's sort of 5 categories that I think are important for us to take a look at as we think about how to move this work forward at a quicker pace. One is the set of work around financing. And it is a reason why the mayor brought on 2 people within our finance cabinet really focused on pursuing state and federal grants, one very specifically focused on grants in the climate space. And not only have we brought in new staff to do this work, but in this past budget, the mayor set aside $75 million to help us to use as local match for the significant state and federal grants that are out there, all geared to being able to bring more resources into Boston to do the work we need. So there's a set of work around financing we're doing. There's a second set of work, which is really around regulatory reform. And there's a lot of credit to the state, who is taking a fresh look at regulation that may exist so that we can move forward with projects that are not only improving the environment within the Commonwealth, but also helping us become more resilient. In addition to those 2 areas is sort of thinking about building the workforce broadly within the city. And that was something we touched on. It was a reason why we pursued a $10 million grant from NOAA, from the federal government, which we were fortunate to receive to be able to expand our workforce development opportunities. The 4th and the 5th sort of pieces of the capacity building that I sort of have in mind, besides financing, regulatory reform, and the workforce. One is a set around organizational structure. I look at something like the city of Boston's coastline. 16% of that coastline is owned by the city. 30% is owned by private parties. 50% is owned by the state, and another 4% is owned by the federal government. That in order for us to think about what an entire resilient city of Boston looks like, we need to think about how we actually work across all of those parties. What's that structure that we put in place? In many ways, to a question you asked earlier, that is part of the intent of the Office of Climate Resilience. How do we actually think about putting structures in place that allow us to work across multiple parties to deliver these things which our residents want? The fifth category is one which is, I think, incredibly important to focus on, which is just around sort of the innovation of how we do this work. I'm a great believer that in this city of all city, in this region of all regions, there are going to be great ideas about how to do really impactful work that makes Boston more resilient and a more wonderful place to live in ways that we haven't yet sort of tested, evaluated, or brought to scale. What are the ideas around material science that we should be looking at? What are the ideas around methods for construction or for contracting that can allow us to do this work, again, at the pace we need? And you can imagine, and some of this is being tested already by partners like the Stone Living Lab. How do you think about nature-based solutions to coastal resilience? How do you think about a change in the way, in the nature of the asphalt itself we're putting on streets to be able to actually reduce the urban heat island effect? There's a whole set of ideas that are out there for us to be able to dive into that's going to help us do this work. And that fifth area is one that we are focused on in the Office of Climate Resilience to figure out how to do this work that residents want.
So 5 big challenges for the office right now.
I mean, all leading to how we actually sort of build that capacity to go faster.
Understood. Well, if residents want to get in touch with the office to address a climate resilience concern, where can they go?
Boston.gov/climate resilience. They can also feel free to reach out to me. My email address is on that website, or chris.osgood@boston.gov. I will say that I'd also encourage residents, and they can see this online as well. There's a set of steps they can simply take if they are interested in learning more about our emergency management efforts, to sign up for Alert Boston and read the resources that our Office of Emergency Management has put together. If residents are interested in having a tree planted in front of their house or potentially on the property they own, there are resources online for that. And we will be hosting a series of community meetings about projects we are doing across the city of Boston. I highly encourage people to come out, voice their opinion, and shape how the city gets built.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris, for coming through. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. If you like what you're hearing, please go to wherever you listen to podcasts, especially Apple or Spotify. Rate and review us. Let us know how you're liking the show. And if you want to get in touch with us, hit us up on Instagram at WBUR-The-Common or send us an email at thecommon@wbur.org. And now it is that time for me to let you know that The Common is produced by Franny Monahan. It's mixed by Emily Jankowski and Paul Vikis. And it's edited by Samatha Joshi and Ben Brock Johnson. And our theme music is Me by Hisu. And from the newsroom of WBUR, I'm your host, Daryl C. Murphy. I will talk to you next week.
Support for this podcast comes from MathWorks. Listen on for a story of how MathWorks partner Greentown Labs supports companies designing a more sustainable world.
When many people think of self-driving cars, they think of cameras looking forward at a road, just like a person might. But GPR does something else.
They are enabling robust, all-condition autonomous vehicle lane keeping using radar.
That's Ashlyn Carlson, the Senior VP of Partnerships at Greentown Labs, a climate tech incubator based in Somerville, Massachusetts, which hosts GPR.
They have a piece of technology that is installed underneath the belly of a vehicle. And that technology allows them to map below the Earth's surface up to 10 feet down. They then use that information to allow vehicles to self-navigate in all types of road and weather conditions.
Another company based at the incubator, H2OK, reduces water usage in industrial manufacturing especially in the cleaning process.
They use IoT sensors in order to basically look at the internal liquid passing through a pipe and to be able to identify when the cleaning process is complete.
And yet another company, Tender, makes a new kind of plant-based meat, which uses much less carbon than animal-based competitors. And yes, Ashlyn has tried it.
And it is absolutely delicious. They retail their products at a restaurant just down the street from Greentown, and I go there all the time.
And these are just a few of the over 200 startups based at Greentown Labs, focused on solving today's climate challenges.
So Greentown was founded in 2011 by 4 entrepreneurs, each of whom had their own businesses, and decided to club together to rent a pretty dark and dingy garage in Cambridge because they wanted to save money on rent. And they discovered in sharing that space that there was actually a lot more that they could support each other with beyond saving money on rent.
The founders helped each other with introductions to investors. They supported each other with writing grant proposals. They shared tools and software. And, over time, Greentown Labs began to grow. And today,
we're incubating over 200 climate tech startups and supporting them with the physical space, which includes prototyping lab space. It includes electronics labs, wet labs where the chemistry is happening, machine shops, tool sheds. We call ourselves Greentown Labs. We truly are a lab. And then beyond the lab space, there's the communal space, the office space, the meeting room space. And that space is really important too, because Greentown is all about community.
And according to Ashlyn, building partnerships is central to developing this community.
The partner connections was up there as being one of the most important things that we offer to our founders. And our partners really do play a critical role in supporting the startups because our partners often have the infrastructure. They definitely have a bunch of talented engineers, scientists, so on and so forth that can support the founders.
One of these partners is MathWorks.
The relationship with MathWorks is one that has existed for a number of years.
Through its startup and incubation program, MathWorks provides access to its advanced software like MATLAB and Simulink, which enables these startups to take their ideas from concept to prototype to production.
The computing software that MathWorks provides is invaluable for our member companies. They might not otherwise be able to access that technology until they have scaled somewhat.
And given how as many as 90% of startups fail, emerging companies need all the help they can get.
Yeah, the statistics for startup survivability is something to be frightened of.
That's Andrew Willard, Global Manager for Startups, Accelerators, and Incubators at MathWorks.
We're a 40-year-old company, but we once were a startup ourselves. We see the startups drive a lot of innovation in several key industries that we play a role.
MathWorks has worked with over 100 Greentown startups, and according to Andrew, Greentown really sets its companies up for success.
Greentown Labs are so important. They do a lot of research on where the markets need the most innovation, and then they look to support the startups that are in that space.
And it's that culture of support that brings joy to Ashlyn at work every day.
Oh my gosh. Honestly, I really think I have the best job in the world. I get to work in a space that feels kind of like a college campus, and it is full of smart, energetic, passionate people building really cool technologies. Sometimes, there's some commotion going on and I can hear a noise and I look, over the balcony and the Boston Dynamics dogs are just running across the space. Or, I walk into the bathrooms at Greentown and one of our startups is testing their primer and paints on the wall because they want to check out the ability to reduce condensation and humidity in the space. space. It just feels like a living lab, and everywhere I look, there is something interesting and different happening, and I get to learn every single day.
To learn more about MathWorks and Greentown Labs, and for more stories, check out wbur.org/mathworks.